Imagine spending years building the world's most powerful higher education system. Imagine millions of students around the world growing up with one dream: to study at an American university, earn a degree, build a career, and perhaps become part of the American economy. For decades, that dream has been one of America's greatest competitive advantages. But now, something is changing. The United States could have more than 110,000 fewer international students on its college and university campuses in the coming academic year. And according to new projections from NAFSA and JB International, that decline could cost the U.S. economy as much as $3.4 billion and nearly 40,000 jobs. So the question is not simply, are fewer international students coming to America? The bigger question is, why are they reconsidering America? And what does that mean for the United States itself? Because international students are not just students. They are consumers. They are researchers. They are future employees. They are entrepreneurs. They contribute to universities, local businesses, laboratories, and communities. And in many cases, they become part of the American talent pipeline. So when those students decide to study somewhere else, America doesn't simply lose tuition dollars. It can lose talent, spending, research capacity, and future economic growth. Let's look at what is happening. According to a preliminary analysis based on data from the Institute of International Education, approximately 1.057 million international students are projected to enroll at U.S. colleges and universities during the 2026 to 27 academic year. Compare that with an estimated 1.169 million during 2025 to 26. That is a decline of roughly 112,000 students. The American Bazaar, reporting on the same projections, describes the expected decline as approximately 9.5%, or up to 110,000 fewer international students. The exact figure may vary slightly depending on rounding, but the direction is unmistakable. The number is going down. And that is significant because international student enrollment had been recovering strongly after the pandemic. During COVID, the number of international students in the United States dropped to roughly 914,000. But then the numbers began recovering. By the 2024 to 25 academic year, approximately 1.178 million international students were studying in the United States. So America had been rebuilding its position. Now, that recovery could be going into reverse. And this is where the story becomes much bigger than education. At the height of international student enrollment in 2023 to 24, international students contributed approximately $43.8 billion to the U.S. economy and supported around 378,000 jobs. For the coming academic year, the projection is approximately $38.3 billion in economic contribution and about 294,000 jobs supported. Think about that difference. Billions of dollars, tens of thousands of jobs, and hundreds of thousands fewer jobs supported compared with the previous peak. This is why the $3.4 billion figure matters. And there is an important distinction here. We should not interpret the $3.4 billion as simply $3.4 billion in university tuition disappearing. That would be misleading. International students spend money across the American economy. They pay for housing. They buy food. They use transportation. They purchase goods and services. They contribute to universities. They participate in research. And, in many cases, they eventually enter the American workforce. So the economic impact spreads far beyond the university campus. A student arriving from India, China, Nigeria, Brazil, or another country doesn't simply hand a tuition check to a university and disappear. That student may rent an apartment, buy groceries, take public transportation, purchase a laptop, eat at local restaurants, work in a laboratory, and potentially build a career in America. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands of students, and you begin to understand why international education has become a significant part of the American economy. But here's where things become even more interesting. The decline may not simply be about students being rejected at the visa stage. There are signs that some students may be reconsidering the United States before they even apply. According to the data cited by the American Bazaar, international applications to U.S. doctoral programs fell by approximately 21% for this fall. International admissions declined by 17%, and overall doctoral program admissions declined by about 15%. That is an important warning sign, because if fewer students are applying in the first place, the problem isn't just visa processing. It suggests that perceptions of the United States may be changing. Students are making a calculation. They are asking, is America still worth the cost? Is the visa process predictable? Will I be able to complete my degree without immigration problems? Can I work after graduation? Will I be able to stay long enough to build a career? And perhaps the most important question, if I spend 4, 5, or 6 years preparing for my future, will the rules still be the same when I graduate? That uncertainty can be incredibly powerful. And this brings us to visas. The United States has introduced a series of immigration and visa policies that have created additional uncertainty for international students. The articles point to visa restrictions, disruptions in visa interviews and processing, new screening procedures, and broader uncertainty surrounding immigration policy. The American Bazaar also notes that limited or delayed visa appointments have been reported in India, China, and across Europe. And that matters because India and China are the two largest sources of international students for the United States. So when processing becomes difficult in those countries, the consequences can be enormous. Now add another unusual factor to the equation: World Cup. The tournament created additional demand for U.S. visa processing. The State Department announced priority visa processing for FIFA World Cup ticket holders traveling to the United States. And the timing was significant. The World Cup final was held on July 19th. But May through August is also traditionally one of the busiest periods for student and exchange visitor visas. Historically, student and scholar applications receive priority during this period because students need to arrive on American campuses before the academic year begins. So international students were competing for visa processing capacity during an already crowded period. For a student who has spent months preparing applications, paying university fees, and planning a move across the world, a delayed visa appointment isn't a minor inconvenience. It can mean missing the beginning of a semester. It can mean losing money. And in some cases, it can mean abandoning the plan entirely. But perhaps the biggest issue is not what happens before students arrive. It is what happens after they arrive. And that brings us to OPT. Optional Practical Training, or OPT, is enormously important to international students. It gives eligible F1 students an opportunity to gain practical work experience in the United States after completing their studies. For many international students, particularly those in STEM fields, this is part of the attraction of studying in America. The equation is relatively straightforward. Pay for an expensive American education, earn a globally recognized degree, gain professional experience, and potentially build a career in the world's largest economy. But if the pathway from education to employment becomes uncertain, the value proposition changes. Imagine you are a student sitting in New Delhi, Beijing, Lagos, or Sao Paulo. You have several options: the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, perhaps other emerging destinations. You're going to spend years of your life and a huge amount of money. You aren't simply choosing a university. You are choosing a future. And if one country gives you a clear pathway from education to employment, while another gives you uncertainty, that can influence your decision. This is why the international student issue is also a competition for global talent. And this is perhaps the most important part of the story. America's universities have historically attracted some of the brightest young people from around the world. Some of those students later became scientists, engineers, doctors, researchers, entrepreneurs, technology leaders, and innovators. International students have played a major role in American research and higher education. So the question isn't just how many students America loses this year. The question is, how many future innovators might choose somewhere else? NAFSA's leadership has warned that driving international students and scholars toward more welcoming countries could weaken America's position as a destination for global talent. And that concern goes beyond universities. It touches hospitals, research laboratories, technology companies, local economies, and America's ability to remain a global innovation leader. Because talent is mobile, capital is mobile, companies are mobile, and increasingly students are mobile too. If students believe America is becoming harder to enter, harder to navigate, and harder to build a future in, they have alternatives. And once those alternatives become established, getting those students back may be difficult. Now, let's bring India into this. For Indian families, the American university system has been one of the most important international education destinations for decades. Thousands upon thousands of Indian students have built their education and career plans around American universities. For many families, studying in the United States isn't simply an educational decision. It is a massive financial investment. Families may sell assets, take loans, use savings, or spend years preparing for the move. And when that investment is combined with visa uncertainty, changing immigration rules, and questions around post-study employment, the calculation becomes more complicated. A student may start asking, should I still choose the United States? Or should I choose Canada, the UK, Australia, Europe? Should I study somewhere closer to home? Should I delay my education? Should I choose a different career path? These individual decisions may appear insignificant, but collectively, they can change the economic landscape. One student deciding against America is just one student. 10,000 students making that decision is a trend. 100,000 students making that decision is an economic story. And that is where the projected $3.4 billion loss becomes important. It is essentially a signal that international students are not just a cultural or educational resource. They are an economic resource. And America has competition. Canada has aggressively positioned itself as an international education destination. The United Kingdom continues to attract students from around the world. Australia has a major international education sector. And European countries are increasingly competing for international talent. The United States still has enormous advantages. Its universities remain among the most prestigious in the world. Its technology sector remains extraordinarily powerful. Its research institutions remain unmatched in many fields. Its labor market offers enormous opportunities. And American universities continue to attract students because of the quality of education and research. So this is not a story about America suddenly becoming an unattractive country. It isn't. The United States remains one of the world's most desirable destinations for international students. The question is whether policy uncertainty could weaken that advantage. Because reputation takes decades to build, but perceptions can change quickly. A student who hears repeated stories about visa delays may hesitate. A family that sees uncertainty around employment may reconsider. A university that sees international applications falling may become concerned. And an American city that loses thousands of international students may see the effects in its local economy. The problem can therefore become self-reinforcing. Fewer students arrive. Universities lose revenue. Local businesses lose spending. Research programs lose potential talent. And other countries gain students who might otherwise have chosen America. At the same time, American universities have to compete harder for a shrinking pool of international applicants. And that creates a larger strategic question. Is the United States willing to sacrifice some of its position as the world's leading destination for global talent in exchange for tighter immigration controls? That is ultimately the debate. There are legitimate reasons for governments to strengthen visa screening. There are legitimate reasons to enforce immigration laws. There are legitimate national security concerns. And international students should not receive an automatic exemption from those concerns. But there is also another legitimate national interest. America needs talent. America needs scientists. America needs engineers. America needs doctors. America needs researchers. America needs entrepreneurs. And America's universities have historically been one of the world's most effective mechanisms for attracting that talent. So the challenge is finding the balance. Security without unnecessary uncertainty. Enforcement without destroying predictability. Screening without discouraging legitimate students. And immigration policy that protects national interests while keeping America competitive. Because the cost of losing international students may not end at $3.4 billion. That is the immediate projected economic impact. The larger cost could be much harder to measure. What happens if a brilliant researcher chooses another country? What happens if an entrepreneur who might have built a company in Silicon Valley chooses Toronto instead? What happens if a future medical researcher conducts groundbreaking work somewhere else? What happens if an entire generation of international students begins thinking of America as a less predictable destination? Those costs don't show up immediately in a government spreadsheet. They appear years later, in research output, in startups, in patents, in jobs, in innovation, and in America's global competitiveness. That is why this story deserves attention. The headline is simple. The United States could lose $3.4 billion as international student enrollment falls. But underneath that headline is a much bigger story. America is competing for the world's talent, and students have choices. The United States can remain the first choice. But being first choice is not guaranteed. It has to be earned. Every year, every admission cycle, every visa interview, every interaction with an international student. And perhaps most importantly, through the promise of something that students value almost as much as the education itself. Certainty about their future. Because for a young person deciding where to spend the next 4, 5, or 6 years of their life, the question isn't only, which country has the best university? It is also, which country gives me the best chance to build the future I want? And if more students begin answering that question with a country other than the United States, the consequences could extend far beyond college campuses. They could reach the American economy itself. And perhaps that is the real warning behind the $3.4 billion figure. America isn't simply at risk of losing students. It could be at risk of losing future talent. And in a global economy where talent is one of the most valuable resources of all, that may ultimately be the cost America cannot afford to ignore.